Hello and welcome. Today, we delve into the harrowing depths of underwater warfare during World War II, a silent, deadly game where technology redefined survival beneath the waves. Imagine a young German U-boat crew relying on the myth of impenetrable stealth, only to be betrayed by a sharp, metallic ping echoing through their steel hull. Sound that signaled the relentless advance of Allied detection. Was their oceanic sanctuary truly unbreakable, or was it just an illusion shattered by a simple yet revolutionary technology? How did a tiny, piercing sonar pulse turn the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic, transforming unseen hunters into hunted prey? Could the once invincible U-boat fleet, confident in their submerged invisibility, have ever anticipated that their own silence would be their undoing? And what does this relentless pursuit reveal about the true power of science and innovation in modern naval warfare? In this story, we will explore how decades of secret research culminated in systems like the primitive yet groundbreaking sonar, developed back in 1918, crucially improved in the interwar years, and finally perfected during the war itself. We'll ask, how did the Allies' technological edge, from early hydrophones to sophisticated active sonar, strip away the ocean's once legendary concealment? How did the deadly ping of active sonar, met with metallic clicks and metallic ringing, become the death knell for countless German submarines? Can you imagine the psychological torment inflicted on crews, knowing every sound could be their last? And ultimately, what lessons does this history hold about the unstoppable march of technological progress in warfare? We promise to trace the entire journey, from the initial illusion of underwater invincibility to the brutal realization that no submarine could truly hide anymore. Prepare to see how a seemingly simple sound wave reshaped naval strategy forever. The most intense moments are about to begin, right now. On a bleak morning of May 25, in the year 1941, deep within the vast and treacherous waters of the North Atlantic, a mere 500 nautical miles south of the formidable Cape Farewell in Greenland, a young midshipman found himself caught in a moment of silent tension. As he clung to the handles of the periscope, his hands trembled, not out of fear of the enemy forces hovering above the surface, but because of the unsettling sound that had suddenly reverberated through the thick steel hull of the submarine U-557. The noise was sharp, metallic, and disturbingly unnatural, a piercing ping that echoed through every compartment of the vessel, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. This was no ordinary sound. It marked a turning point in the silent war waged beneath the waves. Herbert Vierer, a young crew member aboard that submarine, would later record in his personal journal, with a mixture of awe and foreboding, that this particular noise was discovered only many decades after the conflict had ended. To him, it sounded like a church bell tolling the very hour of doom, a stark and ominous warning that their clandestine existence beneath the ocean was no longer safe. It was the unmistakable sign that the British had succeeded in locating them through means far beyond the traditional tools of wartime stealth. For nearly 3 years, German submarine crews, known colloquially as U-boat crews, had believed that the ocean's depths provided an almost impenetrable sanctuary, a refuge where they could operate with near impunity and avoid detection by the relentless patrols of Allied forces. The submarine, in their understanding, was a ghostly shadow, vanishing into the dark waters that cloaked it as thoroughly as night itself cloaks a ship on the surface. They had been taught that submerging was tantamount to disappearing completely, that the darkness of the ocean was a perfect concealment from the prying eyes and listening ears of their enemies. However, on that cold spring morning in 1941, a cruel and harsh truth was revealed to Vierer and the 22 other men aboard U-557. The ocean, once believed to be an impenetrable veil, was no longer a barrier. The Allies had developed technology that could see through the water itself, turning the depths into an open book. What none of these seasoned submariners understood at that moment was that the tiny, sharp ping they heard was only the beginning of a new technological symphony, one that would forever alter the face of underwater warfare. In the subsequent years, German U-boat crews would endure a relentless and systematic psychological assault, as Allied sonar and detection systems advanced from rudimentary experimental devices into highly precise and formidable hunting tools. The mathematics and tactics of underwater combat were being reshaped, not merely by torpedo calculations or manual strategies, but by the unseen, yet omnipresent, wave of sound that could expose their stealthy operations to devastating destruction on an unprecedented scale. The once dominant era of German submarine supremacy was gradually collapsing. This pivotal shift in underwater warfare was not a sudden occurrence but the culmination of a process that had begun decades earlier, specifically during the final months of the First World War. As the war drew to a close, British and French scientists, driven by desperation to counter the nearly unstoppable U-boat threat that had threatened to starve Britain into submission, began pioneering experiments with underwater sound detection. By 1918, the Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Division, working diligently in shore-based laboratories, had developed the first primitive forms of sonar, an acoustic detection system designed to locate submerged vessels. These early models, however, were crude and limited in capability, and the war ended before they could be deployed in large numbers or achieve widespread operational success. During the entire conflict, only 3 U-boats were credited with being detected by hydrophone technology, a predecessor to modern sonar, which would eventually revolutionize anti-submarine warfare. The development of these underwater listening devices was a slow and painstaking process, spanning the decades of the 1920s and the 1930s. British scientists at His Majesty's ship Osprey, the Royal Navy's dedicated anti-submarine training facility located at Portland, refined the basic principles of sound detection. The system they devised, called ASDITCH, operated by transmitting high-frequency sound pulses through the water. When these pulses struck a solid object, such as a submarine hull, they reflected back as echoes. By carefully measuring the time interval between sending the sound pulse and receiving the echo, operators could determine the approximate distance to the detected object. Additionally, by rotating the transducer, they could ascertain the bearing, the direction from which the echo originated. The first operational ASDITCH sets were installed aboard British destroyers and sent to sea in the year 1928. Despite their significance, these early units were rudimentary, representing only the nascent stages of what would become a technological revolution. The development and deployment of these early detection systems marked the beginning of a new era, one the oscillator, a small yet critical component consisting of a quartz crystal disc designed to convert electrical impulses into audible sound waves, had to be carefully suspended just over the side of the ship to function properly. Its effective range was quite limited, capable of detecting objects only up to approximately 3,500 yards under the best possible conditions. These conditions, however, rarely persisted, making the system's operational scope somewhat restricted. The technology in question was incapable of measuring the depth of underwater contacts. It could only provide information about the direction and the approximate distance, parameters essential for navigation and attack planning but not enough to fully understand what lay beneath the water's surface. Operators, often using headphones to interpret the signals, faced the challenging task of differentiating genuine submarine echoes from a confusing array of other underwater phenomena. Echoes bouncing back could originate from a variety of sources such as whales gliding through the water, schools of fish moving in unison, wakes generated by ships passing nearby, or layered thermal structures within the ocean that distorted sound waves. Despite these difficulties, by the year 1939, the Royal Navy had developed a strong belief in the reliability of their newly adopted anti-submarine sonar system, known as ASDICH. This confidence was so profound that senior Admiralty officials firmly believed the submarine threat posed by the German Kriegsmarine had been largely neutralized, or at least significantly diminished. Every destroyer in the Royal Navy fleet was equipped with the ASDICH system, and numerous training academies worked tirelessly to produce hundreds of operators skilled in its use. War plans at the time were built around the expectation that convoys protected by escorts armed with ASDICH would experience only minimal losses, giving a false sense of security rooted in technological optimism. This overconfidence, however, would prove to be a tragic misjudgment, as the harsh realities of war soon demonstrated. On the 3rd of September in 1939, mere hours after Britain officially declared war on Germany, the passenger liner Athenia was torpedoed by the German submarine U-30 approximately west of Ireland, resulting in the loss of 117 lives. This event marked the beginning of the Battle of the Atlantic, a protracted and deadly conflict that would test the limits of technological and tactical innovation. German U-boat commanders swiftly realized that the defenses Britain had boasted about were not as impenetrable as previously believed. Kapitan-Leutnant Otto Kretschmer Gauprien and Joachim Schepke spearheaded their submarines on aggressive patrols, sinking ships with devastating efficiency while suffering remarkably few losses themselves. Admiral Karl Donitz, commanding the German U-boat fleet, observed with a sense of satisfaction as his submarines achieved what became famously known as the First Happy Time, a period of unparalleled success for the Kriegsmarine's underwater forces. The German submariners operated under a carefully cultivated sense of invincibility, bolstered by their belief that their vessels could not be reliably detected when submerged. Training for U-boat crews emphasized a reassuring doctrine. Once submerged, a U-boat was essentially undetectable by enemy sensors. Instructors explained that the vast, absorbing qualities of the ocean would muffle sound and hide movement, rendering the submarine a ghost beneath the waves. Hydrophones, underwater microphones, might pick up the distant noise of a surfaced submarine's propellers, but a vessel running silently on electric motors beneath the surface was considered nearly invisible. This conviction permeated all levels of U-boat operation, fostering a belief in the near invincibility of their submerged tactics. The senior radio operator aboard U-109, Feldwebel Wolfgang Hirschfeld, kept a secret diary in real time during patrols, recording the prevailing mindset. He wrote, "We believed the enemy relied on the same listening devices from the last war." The crew was instructed that their hydrophones could only detect loud machinery noises, implying that as long as they maintained complete silence after diving, they would remain safe from detection. This comforting myth, however, would soon be thoroughly shattered by the reality of modern sonar technology. The first encounter between German U-boat crews and active sonar, a technological innovation that was rapidly changing underwater warfare, resulted in not only a technical surprise but a profound existential shock. When an ASDICH pulse, an intense, directional sound wave, struck a submerged submarine hull, it produced a distinctive sound within the boat that was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. Survivors later described it metaphorically as similar to dropping dried peas into a tin can, producing a rapid series of metallic clicks that would grow louder as the hunting ship drew nearer. Unlike the steady, muffled drone of ship propellers that could be heard through hydrophones, The sonar ping was unmistakably artificial, with a clear directionality and an unsettling degree of precision that seemed almost impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Herbert Werner, serving as the watch officer aboard U-557 during his first wartime patrol in May of 1941, vividly experienced this phenomenon firsthand while stalking a convoy south of Greenland. His memoir decades later, photographs captured the exact moment that the silent tension erupted into chaos. The British destroyer's ASDIC system had finally located them, revealing the submarine's position at periscope depth. The relentless, metallic pinging intensified rapidly, growing louder and more insistent with every passing second. Each sound wave struck the steel hull of the submarine with a sharp, echoing impact, resonating throughout the entire vessel and piercing the stillness inside. All hands aboard froze instinctively at their stations, acutely aware that the enemy above had pinpointed their location with unsettling accuracy. The situation had swiftly transformed from one of stealth and dominance into one of vulnerability and desperation. The hunter had, in the blink of an eye, become the hunted. This sudden reversal of fortune happened almost instantaneously, a stark reminder of how fragile their advantage of invisibility truly was. Veerer, a young sailor just 22 years old and barely half a year removed from the rigorous training of the Naval Academy, watched the expression on his commanding officer's face shift dramatically. The once confident and composed captain's features now reflected a cautious alertness, a silent acknowledgement that their survival hung in the balance. Captain Lodent Otterpulsion, a seasoned veteran who had successfully completed numerous patrols, immediately ordered a dive to 200 meters, knowing that deepening their depth might buy precious time. The crew responded swiftly, executing the order with practiced precision, each man fully aware of what the relentless pinging signified. Their primary tactical advantage, stealth, was slipping away as the enemy's sonar technology, still largely unfamiliar to them, rendered their concealment ineffective. The modern sonar systems aboard the destroyer could reach through vast quantities of water, creating detailed acoustic images of objects hundreds of yards away, providing the hunter with a distinct advantage. The sonar operator, a young man likely no older than Veerer himself, held an edge that transcended mere experience. His equipment was capable of emitting signals at 14,000 cycles per second, a frequency far beyond the limit of human hearing. When these sound waves collided with the submarine's steel hull, they reflected back, traveling through the water and reaching hydrophones mounted beneath the destroyer's keel. The process was simple yet profoundly effective. By measuring the time delay between the emission and reception of the echoes, the operator could calculate the distance to the submarine. The direction from which the echo returned revealed the submarine's bearing, allowing the destroyer's crew to track every subtle movement of the vessel with increasing accuracy. The once uncertain position of the submarine became crystal clear, and the enemy's relentless pursuit was now precise and unrelenting. What followed was a harrowing 7 hours of constant depth charge attacks. Faced with imminent destruction, U-557 dove deeper to 200 meters, shutting down all non-essential systems to minimize noise and rigging itself for silent running. Moving at the slowest possible speed, barely 2 knots, the crew carefully crept away, avoiding any unnecessary noise that might betray their position. The deafening sounds of the destroyer's screws thrashing overhead, the distant splashes of depth charges entering the water, and the countdown of seconds until explosions became an unending symphony of peril. Each detonation sent reverberations through the submarine's steel hull, causing paint chips to flake from bulkheads and light bulbs to shatter under the relentless assault. The crew was subjected to physical trauma, some bleeding from ears and noses, while the boat's structure groaned ominously under the immense pressure. Inside the cramped confines of U-557, time seemed to stretch endlessly, each moment filled with anxiety and the constant threat of imminent catastrophe. The captain ordered all non-essential systems to be shut down, minimizing noise and vibrations. Electric motors operated at their bare minimum, propelling the vessel through the water at barely 2 knots, a deliberate attempt to avoid detection. Every movement, every sound, be it a dropped wrench, a slammed hatch, or the heavy footsteps of a crew member, risked revealing their position to the relentless enemy overhead. In near total silence, the crew remained at their stations, breathing heavily and listening intently to the circling death above. The air inside the submarine grew increasingly foul, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, diesel fumes, and the palpable scent of fear. After 3 hours submerged in this hellish environment, the concentration of carbon dioxide had risen dangerously high, causing some men to gasp desperately for air as their lungs struggled to extract oxygen from the increasingly toxic atmosphere. Veerer, despite his youth and inexperience, meticulously recorded every detail of this ordeal in his mind, an account that would later fill pages of his memoirs. He knew that each moment of this relentless struggle could be their last, and he committed every sensation, every sound, every sign of despair to memory. The temperature inside the boat had climbed past 35 degrees Celsius, signaling the unbearable heat and stifling conditions that compounded their suffering. Some crew members had to strip down to their waists to cope with the it had been recirculated through the lungs of nearly 50 individuals many times over, each breath carrying the remnants of previous explorers, a silent testament to the cycle of life and death beneath the surface. The destroyer above them was a relentless predator, its presence an ominous constant. The ASD operator aboard the submarine maintained unwavering contact, refusing to let go of the vital signal despite the mounting tension. Every few minutes, the metallic pinging grew louder and more insistent, a clear indication that the hunter was drawing closer, preparing for yet another deadly strike. The crew members braced themselves instinctively, their hands clutching tightly onto sturdy stanchions or pressing their bodies against the cold, solid bulkheads as a natural response to impending danger. Then, suddenly, the water erupted with splashes, terrible, thunderous sounds of depth charges plunging into the depths, orchestrated destruction designed to hunt and destroy. The crew counted aloud, sometimes in sequences of 1, 2, 3, or even 5, as charges exploded in patterns that varied from burst to burst. Sometimes 10 at once, each explosion shaking the submarine to its core. The wait for the next attack seemed interminable, each second stretching longer than the last. 7 seconds for a depth charge set to a 100 meters, 12 seconds for 200 meters, and 20 seconds for 300 meters. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a constant edge of dread that kept everyone on high alert. When the explosions finally erupted, the entire vessel shuddered violently. The closest charges lifted the boat bodily out of the water, tossing crew members off their feet, while the hull responded with groans and pops, as if protesting under the immense pressure. From above, cork insulation panels dislodged and fell with a dull thud. Electrical sparks burst from control panels, illuminating the dim interior in flickering flashes. Cracks appeared in the pressure hull, and thin jets of seawater burst through seams under the relentless pressure, spraying into the vessel's interior. Damage control teams scrambled into action, hastily stuffing wooden plugs into cracks, tightening bolts on pipe joints, and reinforcing weakened structural points wherever possible. After 7 long hours submerged, The U-557 had descended to a depth of approximately 280 meters, well beyond its design limit of 220 meters, the hull contracting under the crushing pressure. Rivets groaned and seams seeped, evidence of the vessel's struggle against the immense forces. Yet, Pulsion, the commanding officer, trusted in his ship's resilience. He understood that German engineering had deliberately incorporated safety margins into the design, allowing for some margin of error in such perilous depths. He was also acutely aware that surfacing prematurely to avoid detection would spell disaster. Shallower depths meant increased risk of being spotted and destroyed, so he deliberately kept the submarine at a profound depth, maintaining silence and patience, waiting for the destroyer's fuel or resolve to falter. Finally, the relentless pinging ceased, a sign that the attacker had either lost confidence in their contact or was forced to retreat due to diminishing fuel reserves. The faint hum of the destroyer's propeller faded into the distance. The U-557 remained submerged for another 2 hours, holding its position in the dark depths, before gradually beginning its ascent to the surface with cautious, deliberate movements. When it finally broke the surface after nearly 9 hours submerged, crew members staggered onto the conning tower, gasping for the fresh, untainted Atlantic air. Several vomited upon experiencing the sudden rush of oxygen flooding their lungs, overwhelmed by the change. Others simply stood silently, faces turned skyward, savoring the precious sensation of survival amid the chaos and destruction. The U-557 had survived, as had thousands of other German submarines in the early years of the war. However, the ASD system aboard Allied escort ships, while capable of detecting enemy vessels like the U-boat, was not without serious limitations. One critical flaw was its dead zone, an area immediately beneath the vessel where the transmitted sonar pulse and the returning echo merged, creating a blind spot that could not be charted or detected if the submarine was too close. This zone was especially dangerous because it forced commanders to drop depth charges over the stern after the submarine was already lost to detection, providing clever and resourceful captains with precious seconds to execute evasive maneuvers. Furthermore, ASD performed poorly in turbulent sea conditions. Temperature layers in the water, known as thermoclines, bent sound waves, causing shadow zones where submarines could hide from detection entirely. Experienced U-boat commanders learned to exploit these natural phenomena, diving beneath the thermal layers where the enemy's sonar beams couldn't reach them, slipping silently through the layers of water at speeds that minimized their acoustic signature. They mastered the art of quiet running, shutting down all non-essential machinery, moving at reduced speeds, and using every available advantage to remain undetected in the face of increasingly sophisticated Allied anti-submarine tactics. The silent pace of a submarine's propellers was deliberately slowed, a measure that successfully prevented cavitation, those ominous bubbles that betray a vessel's presence through noise. Even the mere act of an individual walking with excessive heaviness could potentially reveal a submarine's position, emphasizing the importance of stealth not only in movement but in every subtle detail of operation. Throughout the years of 1940 and 1941, such meticulous tactics allowed German submarines to sustain their operational effectiveness, despite the relentless efforts of Allied sonar technology to locate them. The learning curve for submarine commanders heavily favored those with experience. Men like Vierer, who had survived their initial encounters with ASDIC detection systems, meticulously studied the weaknesses inherent in Allied technologies. They observed that the deployment of multiple escort ships, each transmitting sound on distinct frequencies, created a complex acoustic environment that confounded enemy detection efforts. As a result, Submarines learned to hide within the inherently noisy environment generated by convoys themselves, where the collective hum of engines and propellers from dozens of merchant ships formed a sound barrier capable of masking their presence. The German Navy's underwater detection systems were quite different in fundamental design from those used by their Allied counterparts. Instead of relying primarily on active sonar, which emits sound pulses and listens for echoes, German engineers had focused on developing advanced passive listening arrays. These systems aimed to detect the faint sounds of enemy ships and submarines without revealing their own position. One such device was the Grin Horscharet, a group listening apparatus that had become standard equipment on the U-boat starting in the year 1935. This sophisticated array consisted of 48 hydrophones mounted along each side of the submarine's bow, forming a formidable network. These hydrophones could detect individual ships at ranges up to 20 kilometers and could track entire convoys from distances as far as 100 kilometers, although the bearing accuracy at such ranges was limited, making precise torpedo attacks challenging. This technological approach reflected the strategic mindset of the Germans. Submarines were envisioned as hunters rather than prey, their primary role being to locate and track enemy vessels rather than evade detection themselves. Consequently, the Germans invested heavily in listening devices designed to locate targets passively, under the assumption that their adversaries would depend on similarly sophisticated systems. However, the Germans did not seriously entertain the possibility that Allied ships could actively track submerged submarines by analyzing reflected sound waves, an understanding that would eventually prove to be a catastrophic misjudgment. Captain Herbert Schultzer, commanding the U-boat U-48, documented in his patrol report from October of 1940 that the British anti-submarine measures remain inadequate. Their listening devices force us to produce noise. When we operate in silent mode, detection becomes impossible. This assessment was widely shared among U-boat commanders at the time and contributed to a false sense of security. The year 1942 marked a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, bringing devastating changes that initially caught the Germans unprepared to counter. In February, Admiral Donitz's U-boat force, U-boat, began operations along the American East Coast, exploiting the United States' complete lack of readiness for submarine warfare. These operations, dubbed the Second Happy Time by the Germans, saw merchant ships sailing close to the illuminated shorelines. Often without escorts and sailing independently, they were sinking ships at an alarming rate. Hundreds of vessels fell victim to U-boat attacks, creating what the crews called the American shooting season. Meanwhile, British and American scientists were making revolutionary advances in anti-submarine technology. Recognizing the need for a unified effort, Britain had transferred ASDIC technology, an early form of underwater detection, to the United States free of charge in September of 1940. Understanding that only a combined, collaborative research approach could rapidly develop effective countermeasures, American scientists at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington initiated parallel development of what they called sonar, an acronym for sound navigation and ranging. By the early months of 1942, the combined efforts of British and American researchers began to produce significant breakthroughs, fundamentally transforming the Atlantic battlefield. These technological advancements would soon tip the balance, challenging the German U-boat fleet's dominance and marking a turning point in the ongoing naval struggle. The development and deployment of sonar technology during World War II marked a remarkable milestone in wartime scientific collaboration, exemplifying how nations can work together under the pressures of global conflict. British scientists, with their deep expertise in anti-submarine warfare, arrived in Washington carrying detailed blueprints, comprehensive operational manuals, and even actual ASDIC sonar equipment, which had been taken from Royal Navy destroyers. These materials provided the American military and engineering teams with invaluable insights into the design and functionality of the British systems. American engineers meticulously studied every aspect of the British models, from their construction to their operational principles, and then applied their own industrial ingenuity to enhance the technology's performance and manufacturability. The British initially used quartz crystal transducers, which were assembled by hand in very limited quantities due to the complexity and precision required. In contrast, American engineers developed magnetostrictive transducers, using nickel tubes, that could be mass-produced efficiently, enabling rapid scaling of production. Additionally, the British ASDIC sonar used streamlined protective domes designed to minimize drag and protect the equipment, while American researchers experimented with spherical domes that offered potentially superior acoustic properties. These spherical designs aimed to improve the clarity and range of sonar signals, a critical factor in detecting elusive submarines. This technological collaboration extended far beyond the hardware itself. Royal Navy officers contributed years of operational experience, sharing crucial tactical knowledge with American anti-submarine warfare trainees. They taught Americans about how temperature layers in the ocean could influence sonar beams, how skilled submarine commanders exploited dead zones, areas where sonar signals are weak or absent, and how experienced sonar operators could distinguish genuine submarine echoes from false returns or background noise. This transfer of operational expertise compressed what would normally be years of learning into a matter of months. As a result, American anti-submarine forces could be rapidly equipped with effective capabilities, significantly shortening the time it would have taken to develop such expertise independently. By the middle of the year 1942, American shipyards were busy outfitting every destroyer, destroyer escort, and corvette with advanced sonar systems. The immense effort was coordinated by the United States Maritime Commission, which ensured that all equipment adhered to strict standards. This standardization was crucial. It allowed parts to be interchangeable between ships, enabled operators to transfer seamlessly from one vessel to another without additional training, and ensured a consistent tactical approach across the entire fleet. The scale of American industrial production converted sonar from a specialized British naval technology into a widely available, effective anti-submarine weapon used across Allied forces. Several key innovations transformed its effectiveness from a useful detection tool into a deadly weapon capable of hunting and destroying submarines with high precision. First, the introduction of power rotation systems dramatically increased the scanning speed of sonar heads, allowing escorts to sweep through wider arcs quickly. Previously, operators had to manually turn the transducers using hand cranks, a slow process that limited the search area. Electric motors replaced manual operation, enabling the sonar heads to rotate through 90 degrees in seconds. This technological leap meant that escort vessels could scan their entire forward hemisphere, port to starboard, in the same time it once took to examine a narrow slice of ocean, greatly enhancing their ability to detect submarines before they could launch attacks. Second, the development of streamlined steel domes replaced the early canvas covers that protected the transducers. Canvas covers created turbulent water flow at higher speeds, generating noise that could mask the returning signals from submarines, especially at speeds above 15 knots. Steel domes, shaped through wind tunnel testing and hydrodynamic analysis, allowed water to flow smoothly around the transducer even at higher speeds, up to 20 knots, without creating additional noise. This improvement enabled escort ships to operate at higher speeds during search and attack phases, closing in on submarines more rapidly without losing sonar contact, which was vital in the fast-paced environment of wartime escort operations. Third, the integration of dual-frequency systems further enhanced sonar capabilities. These systems allowed ships to operate sonar at two different frequencies simultaneously, providing better discrimination between real submarine echoes and false signals caused by marine life or environmental noise. The combination of these technological advances made Allied sonar systems far more effective and deadly, transforming them into formidable tools in the fight against the submarine threat that was so crucial to maintaining control of vital maritime routes during the war. The advancements in sonar technology during the early 1940s revolutionized underwater warfare, especially with the integration of dual-frequency systems operating simultaneously at both 14 and 30 kilocycles. These innovations significantly extended the range at which submarines could be detected and improved the precision of locating them. The lower frequency signals, which traveled much farther through water, allowed Allied ships and escorts to detect submerged vessels from greater distances. However, these low-frequency transmissions, while excellent for initial detection, offered only course-bearing information, making it difficult to pinpoint exact locations. Conversely, high-frequency pulses provided detailed, sharp echoes that could accurately define a submarine's position and orientation but were quickly absorbed and diminished in seawater, limiting their effective range. By intelligently combining both frequencies, naval operators gained a strategic advantage. They could utilize the low-frequency signals to locate submarines at maximum possible distances, then switch swiftly to high-frequency pulses as the target drew nearer, enabling precise tracking and targeting. Some of the most advanced sonar systems of the era automated this process, alternating between frequencies in rapid succession, thus providing the best of both worlds: extended detection range and high-resolution tracking within a single sweep. Among these technological marvels, the most groundbreaking development was the Type 147 ASDIC set introduced in 1943. This sophisticated system was capable of three-dimensional tracking, a feat that transformed underwater warfare by providing not just bearing and distance but also depth information. This new capability meant that Allied escort ships could now determine the exact position of a submarine in the three-dimensional space of the ocean. They could see where the enemy vessel sat beneath the water's surface, allowing them to plan depth-charge attacks with unprecedented accuracy. The long-held illusion of a submarine's safe sanctuary beneath the sea was rapidly dissolving. German U-boat crews began noticing a puzzling increase in detection rates, which seemed to defy explanation. Oberleutnant Wehrer, who was promoted to first watch officer aboard U-230 in late 1942, recorded this shift in his logs. Reflecting on the situation, Wehrer recalled that in 1941, if U-230 descended to considerable depths and maintained silence, it could often evade detection from escorts for no more than an hour before losing contact. However, by 1943, the situation had changed dramatically. Escorts could maintain contact with a submerged submarine for 5, 6, or even 7 hours. Their sonar operators seemed to know precisely where the submarine was, even its depth, as if they possessed some form of underwater sight. When depth charges exploded at exactly the right depth, it was as if the escorts had gained an almost supernatural ability to see into the submarine's secret hideout. This marked a profound shift in the technological landscape, a reality that German naval intelligence was slow to understand fully. The Allies had not merely enhanced their existing sonar equipment, they had fundamentally transformed it. The introduction of the Type 147 ASDIC allowed for real-time, three-dimensional tracking of submerged vessels, rendering previous tactics, such as diving deep to evade detection, obsolete. Changing course no longer guaranteed that contact would be lost, and silent running was no longer a foolproof way to remain invisible. The psychological toll on the submarine crews was immense. Unlike surface battles, where adversaries could visually confirm each other's positions and engage directly, underwater hunters relied solely on persistent, often chilling sonar pings. The relentless ping, ping, ping became an auditory symbol of impending doom. Each sound represented a destroyer's sonar operator precisely calculating their position, depth, and movement. Men aboard the submarines understood that these pings signified that their adversaries were closing in, meticulously plotting their every move. As depth charges were set with lethal precision to explode at the submarine's known depth, crew members could sense that their destruction was imminent. The attack could happen in seconds, with no warning save for the splash of charges entering the water overhead. The sound of sonar, maddening and unyielding, cut through the submarine's compartments like a relentless nightmare. Veterans vividly described the noise as akin to fingernails scraping across slate, amplified thousands of times over, reverberating through steel hulls and spreading through every part of the vessel. This deafening noise penetrated the forward torpedo room, the engine spaces, and every other compartment, making escape or concealment impossible. Some crew members attempted to muffle the sound by stuffing cotton into their ears, but the hull itself conducted the noise, ensuring that the deafening pinging was impossible to escape. It traveled through deck plates, through the air in the confined spaces, and into every corner of the submarine. It was omnipresent, an unrelenting reminder of their helplessness in the face of advanced detection technologies. The psychological impact of this relentless sonar barrage was profound and terrifying. The men aboard submarines knew that each ping signaled that their enemies were calculating their exact position, and that death could arrive at any moment, with no apparent warning except the sudden splash of death charges descending from above. The sound seemed to every sailor aboard a U-boat in those tumultuous days understood the fundamental principles of physics that governed their underwater world. Sound, they knew, traveled through water at an approximate velocity of 1,500 meters per second. This knowledge was crucial for their survival and effective operation. When an ASIC operator deployed their equipment, hearing an echo 2 seconds after the initial ping meant that the submarine was roughly 1,500 meters away from the source of the sound. This simple calculation, dividing the travel time of the sonar signal by 2, allowed them to estimate the distance accurately. Moreover, the direction from which that echo returned provided the bearing, revealing the submarine's position relative to the hunter. By the year 1943, with the advent of the advanced three-dimensional ASDIC system, the angle at which sound waves reflected back from the target could also reveal the depth of the enemy vessel, adding an extra layer of tactical information. In this deadly game of hide and seek beneath the waves, the submarine had no real refuge. Every aspect of its position was known to the relentless hunters above the surface. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, whose vessel the U-109 had remarkably survived multiple depth charge assaults during the early years of 1942 and into the first half of 1943, documented this harrowing experience in his diary. He recounted the persistent, almost deafening sound of the sonar pings that seemed to follow their boat relentlessly, hour after hour. The crew sat in utter darkness below deck, conserving their precious battery power while the ominous signals continued uninterrupted. The air inside grew foul and thick with the stench of carbon dioxide, as men gasped for breath amid the stifling confines. The constant pinging, accompanied by the circling sounds of enemy vessels overhead, created an atmosphere of tense dread. When the anti-submarine vessels launched their depth charges, the crew would listen intently, trying to count the number of splashes. Hirschfeld's diary entries describe this tense ritual. 1, 2, 5, 10 depth charges, they would count, each explosion rocking the hull and rattling their nerves. After each barrage, they would wait in anxious silence, pondering whether this pattern of explosions might be the one that finally breached their defenses, flooding the submarine with seawater and sealing their fate. Hirschfeld's writings from early 1943 vividly captured the declining mental state of the U-boat crews under relentless attack. Men who had once been confident and courageous warriors now showed signs of profound trauma. After particularly severe depth charge assaults, sailors would shake uncontrollably for hours on end. Some refused to eat, their stomachs knotted with anxiety, while others sought temporary relief in sleep, hoping to escape the relentless torment through unconsciousness. A few broke down entirely, succumbing to tears or becoming catatonic, paralyzed by fear. Despite these mounting psychological stresses, the captains and officers endeavored to maintain morale through strict routines and disciplined conduct. Daily drills persisted, equipment was meticulously maintained, and watch stations were manned around the clock. Yet beneath their outward composure, all aboard knew the stark truth. The ocean, which once had offered a measure of protection, no longer served as a safe haven. The technological innovations that had rendered submarines the most formidable weapons of the previous conflict had been effectively countered by new, more advanced anti-submarine devices. These innovations transformed the ocean from a battlefield of stealth into one of detection and destruction. The balance of power had shifted decisively, and no amount of German engineering skill or courage could reverse this trend. The spring of 1943 marked the climax of this crisis, the crisis of the Battle of the Atlantic. In the month of March alone, German U-boats sank a total of 120 merchant ships, nearly 700,000 tons of Allied shipping, while losing only a dozen of their own submarines. Nearly two-thirds of these sinkings took place while the Allied vessels were convoyed, organized groups of ships traveling together for mutual protection, a cornerstone of Allied maritime strategy. For 20 days in that critical month, Admiral Donitz's wolfpacks advanced perilously close to severing Britain's vital Atlantic lifeline, the supply routes that sustained the island nation. This period represented the closest that German submarines had come to crippling Allied communication and supply lines during the entire war. Historical accounts from the Royal Navy later confirmed that the Germans had never before come so near to disrupting the vital link between the New World and the Old. However, this period also signified the turning point. The technological and tactical advantage was shifting decisively in favor of the Allies. Shipyards across the United States, in particular, ramped up their production of escort vessels, destroyers, corvettes, and frigates, all equipped with improved active sonar systems that significantly enhanced their ability to detect and track submarines. These new escort vessels began flooding into the Atlantic in vast numbers, providing a much-needed countermeasure to the U-boat threat. The tide was turning, and despite the grim in the vast expanse of the mid-Atlantic Ocean, a new generation of long-range Liberator aircraft, equipped with both advanced radar systems and specialized sonar buoys known as sonobuoys, closed the previously unbreachable sea corridor where the submarine patrols of the U-boat fleet had operated beyond the reach of land-based aircraft. By May of 1943, this period would come to be remembered as Black May for the Marine Forces. During this brutal month, a staggering total of 41 U-boat submarines were destroyed, an alarming loss that represented approximately a quarter of their operational strength at the time. This devastating attrition left a profound impact on the strategic outlook of the naval campaign. On the 24th of May, Admiral Donitz, visibly shaken by the catastrophic toll inflicted upon his submarine fleet, issued a temporary order for the withdrawal of U-boat operations from the North Atlantic theater. In his war diary, he recorded his apprehension, stating, "We are facing a situation where enemy attempts to restrict our operations have succeeded. Their sea and air anti-submarine forces have increased enormously. Our losses have become unsustainable." The stark reality was laid bare through the cold, hard statistics that told a brutal and unequivocal story. Analyzing the first 3 weeks of May alone, 96 U-boat submarines had been deployed into the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. Out of these, 41 were lost, a devastating rate of destruction. More alarmingly, 43% of those deployed never made it back to port, their crews lost at sea. To put this into perspective, during all of the previous year, 1941, the total number of U-boat losses from all causes combined was only 35. In just 3 weeks of May, the Allies had destroyed more submarines than in the entire first year of the war. The ratio of merchant ships sunk per submarine lost had also become disastrous by this point. Historically, the Allies had experienced a favorable exchange rate, roughly 10 merchant ships for every U-boat lost during patrols in early 1941, most of which returned safely after their missions. However, by May of 1943, the rate had skyrocketed to 12 merchant ships sunk for every submarine destroyed, a clear indication that the tide of the battle had turned against the U-boat fleet. The losses had become so rapid that the submarines were being eliminated faster than they could sink their targets, severely undermining their strategic purpose. The human stories behind these grim statistics were equally harrowing. One such tale involved U-463, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Leo Wolfpower. On the 5th of May, while stalking a convoy designated ONS 5, the submarine was detected by the Allied Aztec sonar system. A destroyer, the Vedette, secured a solid contact and maintained it despite the submarine's evasive maneuvers. For 3 long hours, Wolfpower employed every tactic in the German tactical manual, diving to great depths, changing course frequently, altering speed, and deploying bubble decoys in an attempt to escape. Yet, nothing worked. The contact remained unbroken. As the submarine's batteries neared exhaustion and it sustained damages from near-miss depth charges, Wolfpower made the desperate decision to surface and engage the destroyer with the deck gun. The Vedette's 4-inch guns swiftly destroyed U-463 in a matter of minutes, resulting in the loss of 46 men, with only 3 managing to survive. Another tragic incident involved U-192, commanded by Lieutenant Vera. On May 6, the submarine was relentlessly hunted for 6 hours by escort ships from convoy SC-129. The U-192 dove to a depth of 300 meters, far beyond its designed operational limit. The hull groaned and creaked under the immense pressure, and multiple leaks appeared in its structure. Despite these damages, the submarine's sonar contacts persisted, and the escort ships coordinated their attacks with precision. One escort maintained continuous Aztec contact, while others positioned themselves for depth charge runs. When the attack was launched, the charges exploded at exactly 300 meters depth, causing the pressure hull to crack and allowing seawater to flood in. Only 8 of the crew escaped the sinking vessel alive. The remaining 40 were lost, drowning in the cold depths. On the same day, May 6, a new U-boat, designated U-531, was on her very first patrol when she was detected by an RAF Liberator aircraft equipped with airborne radar. The aircraft's radar illuminated the submarine from half a mile away, a surprising development that caught U-531 commanders off guard, as they previously believed themselves safe during night surface operations. The Liberator's powerful radar beam revealed the vessel's position, and as the aircraft dropped depth charges before the crew could submerge, the submarine sustained damage but remained afloat. The escort ships, closing in on the radar contact, quickly obtained additional ASDIC contact and launched a determined attack to finish off the vessel. These stories serve to illustrate what was relentlessly pursued by Allied aircraft and surface ships, turning what was once a vast, open sea into a perilous maze where every shadow and sound kept the crew on edge. The once confident German submariners now faced an overwhelming technological disparity that rendered their stealth tactics almost useless. Throughout the relentless days of Black May, the mental toll on the crews stationed at sea grew increasingly severe. Radio messages transmitted heartbreaking updates. One vessel after another failed to return from patrols, their crews lost forever to the depths. Friends and comrades, once inseparable in training and purpose, disappeared beneath the waves, leaving behind only silence and the haunting echoes of their last transmissions. The vast ocean, which had previously served as a hunting ground for German submarines, had transformed into a deadly arena where they themselves became prey. Constantly, the ominous sound of sonar pings echoed through the submarine's control rooms, serving as relentless reminders that the enemy could detect them at any moment. These sonar pulses, once the silent guardians of a submarine's concealment, now betrayed their presence with unyielding precision, forcing crews to confront the brutal truth. There was nowhere safe to hide. In a desperate effort to maintain operational effectiveness amid these dire circumstances, the command staff in Berlin issued orders of denial. They insisted that the losses were merely temporary setbacks, urging the crews to persevere despite mounting casualties. New tactics were dispatched to the submarines at sea, with commanders being advised to hold on, to believe that the tide of battle would eventually turn in their favor. Yet, those aboard the submarines knew all too well that hope was fading. They had endured the relentless tracking by ASDIC sonar systems, survived depth charge attacks that seemed to strike with uncanny accuracy, and witnessed the tragic death of comrades when hulls split apart beneath the brutal explosions. No amount of propaganda could erase the vivid memories of these harrowing experiences. Oberleutnant Wehrer, who at this point was commanding his own vessel, the U-415, first-hand bore witness to the brutal new reality during a patrol in April of 1943. In his memoir, he recounted the terrifying encounter, describing the relentless pursuit that began mere hours after reaching their designated area. For 3 days, the escort ships hunted them with unyielding determination, their sonar constantly tracking the U-415 without loss of contact. The crew was forced to dive to their maximum depth of 300 meters, and attempt to escape, causing the hull to groan under the immense pressure and rivets to pop free. Despite these desperate measures, the pinging signals persisted, revealing their positions with unrelenting clarity. When night fell, and they surfaced in an attempt to evade detection, aircraft appeared overhead, their searchlights piercing the darkness. The crew understood then that there was no sanctuary left. They had become targets in a merciless shooting gallery. Wehrer's patrol aboard U-415 was among his shortest and most harrowing, beginning on April 10, 1944, when the boat departed La Pellice. The mission was to patrol the western approaches to the English Channel, a task that Vera knew was almost suicidal. The once thriving waters of the Bay of Biscay had become a nightmare for submarines, with the combination of Allied air patrols and surface escorts making it impossible for submarines to surface safely, even under cover of darkness. The introduction of the snorkel, a device allowing diesel engines to run while submerged, had offered some respite, but it was no match for the ever-improving Allied radar systems. The small protrusion of the snorkel above the surface could be detected with ease, rendering the submarine vulnerable. U-415 managed to traverse the Bay of Biscay by staying submerged for an exhausting 18 hours at a time, relying solely on its batteries and careful navigation. Once clear of the treacherous waters of the Bay of Biscay and into the open Atlantic, Vera made a brief surfacing to recharge the batteries, an act of necessity in an increasingly hostile environment. Within just 20 minutes, however, the peaceful horizon was shattered by the appearance of a Royal Air Force Liberator bomber, which had already detected their radar emissions before the crew had even glimpsed the aircraft overhead. With seconds to spare, Vera ordered the submarine to crash dive, and the vessel responded, plunging beneath the waves just in time to avoid destruction. The depth charges falling sternward damaged the stern torpedo tube, an injury that still left the boat operational, but the threat was far from over. For the next 60 hours, U-415 was relentlessly hunted by Allied aircraft and surface vessels, transforming what had once been a vast, open expanse into a deadly labyrinth where every shadow, sound, and ripple could mean the difference between life and death. This relentless pursuit underscored the stark reality of the new naval warfare, an era where technological superiority had decisively shifted away from the submariners, forcing them into a constant state of vigilance, fear, and improvisation as they faced an enemy equipped with 5 of the submerged vessels, silent and stealthy, moved cautiously through the depths, their electric motors humming softly as they slipped away from the patrol zone at a steady pace of 3 knots. Commander Vera, from his vantage point on the bridge, understood all too well that the Allied hunter-killer groups were operating with meticulous coordination. Their task was to detect and destroy submarines like his, and their strategies were finely tuned to maximize success. He knew that any aircraft detection, any sign of their presence, would send surface escorts racing with urgency towards their location, eager to intercept and eliminate the threat. Sure enough, on the 18th of April, the unmistakable sound of Aztec pings began resonating through the submarine's hull, echoing like sharp, rhythmic vibrations. The sonar signals indicated that a surface escort had sensed their trail. Recognizing the danger, Vera ordered the vessel to descend further into the abyss, taking her down to a depth of 250 meters, and to execute silent running. All noise was minimized. The submarine moved as quietly as possible, yet the relentless pinging persisted. The escort's sonar contact was clear and firm. It maintained its lock on U-415 hour after hour, a relentless pursuit that refused to falter. Vera threw every evasive maneuver he knew, altering course sharply by 90 degrees, trying to throw off the operator's bearings. However, the pinging persisted, unwavering in its pattern. He increased the boat's speed briefly in an attempt to create confusion, then slowed once more, hoping that by unsettling the sonar operator, he might buy some respite. But the pinging only grew more intense, a sign that the surface escort was gradually closing in. In a desperate countermeasure, Vera released a decoy, a pill, and a bubble of noise-making material designed to mimic the submarine's own signals. Yet, despite these efforts, the sonar echoes did not waver. The experienced operator aboard the escort was adept at discerning genuine submarine signatures from decoys, and he continued to track U-415 with unwavering precision. The hours stretched on, and as the night deepened, the first depth charges began to fall. The explosions were precise, terrifying in their accuracy. They detonated exactly at the submarine's current depth of 250 meters, causing the hull to shudder violently. Vera made the decision to descend even further, taking the boat down to 300 meters, an extreme depth where the pressure was immense and the stress on the vessel was relentless. The bulkheads strained under the pressure, paint peeled away from the walls, and the hull groaned in protest with every tremor. The crew, faces etched with fear and exhaustion, stood rigid at their stations, knowing full well that death was closing in. The relentless attack persisted through the entire night and into the early hours of the next day. The men aboard the boat were pushed to their physical and mental limits, drained, frightened, and uncertain whether they would survive. The batteries powering their submerged refuge were nearly exhausted, and the air quality was becoming dangerously poor, threatening their ability to breathe comfortably. Commander Vera faced an impossible dilemma. Should he surface and fight, risking immediate destruction under the escort's guns, with no hope of escape? Or should he remain, submerged in the hope that the batteries would hold out longer, or that the hunter would eventually run low on fuel or exhaust his depth charges? After careful consideration, he decided on patience. He chose to wait, to hold his position as long as possible, trusting that the relentless circling overhead would eventually break the attack. For 16 long hours, U-415 crept through the darkness of the depths, with death looming just above the surface. The pinging finally ceased, signaling that the escort had expended its entire load of depth charges and had withdrawn. Vera waited in tense silence for a further 4 hours, monitoring the sonar, until he was certain the danger had passed. Then, cautiously, he brought U-415 to the surface, only to find the surrounding ocean empty and silent. The mission was over, aborted, leaving behind a crew battered by trauma and exhaustion. This was the last patrol for U-415. She never returned to combat duty. Her final resting place was in her bunker at Toulon, where she was sunk during a devastating aerial attack by Allied aircraft in July of the year 1944. Vera survived only because he happened to be ashore when the bombs struck, narrowly escaping the destruction. The technological gap between the Axis and Allied anti-submarine efforts continued to widen as the war progressed. By mid-1943, Allied escorts were equipped with an array of advanced systems, more sophisticated sonar, radar capable of detecting surfaced submarines in night or foggy conditions, and underwater listening networks created by dropping sonobuoys from aircraft. These sonobuoys formed an extensive and overlapping underwater surveillance system, monitoring vast areas with remarkable precision. Additionally, the Allies developed forward-throwing weapons like the Hedgehog during the height of the Battle of the Atlantic. The strategic importance of anti-submarine warfare grew exponentially, with Allied forces deploying a variety of sophisticated tactics and cutting-edge technology to combat the relentless threat posed by German U-boats. Escort carriers and escort ships, equipped with advanced radar and sonar systems, provided crucial air cover and maritime patrols, playing a pivotal role in safeguarding convoys traversing treacherous waters. One particularly challenging area was known as the Mid-Atlantic Gap, a vast stretch of ocean where aircraft had historically been unable to operate effectively due to the limited range of their aircraft. In this zone, U-boats often roamed freely, attacking supply convoys with impunity. However, with time, This gap was effectively closed thanks to the deployment of extremely long-range Liberator bombers, flying from bases in Newfoundland and Northern Ireland, capable of patrolling and striking far beyond previous limits. Every inch of ocean that ships and submarines crossed was under meticulous surveillance, monitored by a network of overlapping sensor arrays designed to detect even the most covert movements. When a U-boat, often called a U-bot, in some operational contexts, approached a convoy, detection was almost guaranteed. If the submarine attempted to communicate with others using radio signals, the Allies' Huff-Duff triangulation system could pinpoint its location, prompting escorts to rush to intercept the threat. Conversely, if the U-boat surfaced at night to shadow the convoy visually, radar systems would detect its silhouette, allowing aircraft to swoop in and attack swiftly. Approaching underwater, the submarine was detected by sophisticated sonar systems like ASDICH, which could pick up its acoustic signature from the depths. The submarine faced a perilous dilemma, with three particularly dangerous choices available. First, it could remain at a distance, unable to launch an effective attack. Second, it could surface deliberately to engage the convoy visually, risking destruction from aircraft overhead. Third, it could attempt to close in, while submerged, only to be vulnerable to aggressive escort ships armed with advanced anti-submarine weapons. Each option carried a high risk of failure and destruction. A revolutionary development in anti-submarine technology was the introduction of the Hedgehog weapon system. Prior to its deployment, depth charges required escorts to pass directly over a submerged U-boat, dropping their payload behind the target and often losing contact at the critical final moments. Hedgehog changed this dynamic entirely. It fired a salvo of 24 small, forward-thrown bombs arranged in an elliptical pattern, allowing the escort to maintain sonar contact, specifically with the ASDICH sonar, throughout the attack. Each of these small bombs was packed with 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, designed to detonate upon contact with a hard surface like a submarine's hull. If all 24 missed, they would sink harmlessly to the ocean floor, but the escort could immediately launch another pattern. Even a single hit, however, was typically enough to cause catastrophic damage, as the explosion would trigger surrounding bombs to detonate in quick succession, unleashing a destructive blast capable of cracking the pressure hull of a submerged U-boat. German U-boat commanders soon learned to dread Hedgehog attacks. Unlike traditional depth charges, which could explode whether they hit the target or not, the Hedgehog system provided instant, unequivocal feedback about the success of an attack. A moment of silence indicated a miss, while the loud explosion of a hit signaled a probable kill. Such immediate confirmation was psychologically devastating. Depth charge explosions, although frightening, often only caused damage that a U-boat could survive. In contrast, a Hedgehog strike, with its direct and decisive feedback, often meant certain death for the submarine, heightening the tension and fear among U-boat crews. Later, the Allies introduced an even more lethal weapon system called the Squid, which became operational in late 1943. The Squid implemented a radical leap forward in anti-submarine tactics by employing 3 large mortars, each capable of firing a pattern of 3 depth charges approximately 250 yards ahead of the attacking vessel. Unlike the Hedgehog, which relied on contact detonation, the Squid's charges were set to explode at predetermined depths, calculated precisely by an onboard automatic computer that processed data from the ASDICH sonar. This system could predict the future position of the evasive U-boat, factoring in its maneuvers, and adjust the depth charge's timing accordingly, thereby increasing the likelihood of a hit. The effectiveness of the Squid system was significant. Frigates equipped with it boasted a kill rate of roughly 1 in 4 attacks, a stark contrast to the less than 5% success rate associated with traditional depth charge tactics. German countermeasures struggled to match the advanced technology employed by the Allies. For example, the Pillenwerfer, a chemical device that generated streams of bubbles intended to deceive sonar, proved only effective against inexperienced operators. Veteran sonar operators quickly learned to distinguish the chaotic, bubbly echoes from the solid return signals produced by a steel hull, allowing them to ignore the decoys in the intricate game of underwater deception. One of the more advanced countermeasures involved a carefully crafted decoy designed to mimic the appearance and behavior of a real submarine snorkel. This contraption was a balloon, approximately 1 meter in diameter, meticulously coated with a series of thin aluminum strips and filled with calcium hydride. Its operation was ingenious in its simplicity but complex in execution. The balloon would slowly ascend from the depths of the ocean. As it reached shallower waters, the calcium hydride inside would react chemically with the seawater, generating hydrogen gas in the process. This produced a buoyant force that kept the balloon neutrally buoyant, effectively mimicking a submarine's snorkel on radar systems, which often detected such features as a sign of a submerged vessel preparing to surface or vent. From the perspective of radar detection, this floating decoy appeared convincingly similar to a real submarine snorkel, creating a valid echo that could deceive even sophisticated sonar systems. However, the deployment of this device was limited by several significant constraints. It could only be launched from stationary submarines, which rendered it less effective in truly dynamic combat scenarios. Its slow ascent meant that it could not be used to rapidly defend a submarine during evasive maneuvers. Additionally, it lacked the ability to move laterally, so once deployed, it remained fixed in position, making it obvious over time that the target was not a genuine submarine. Any operator of the Aztec sonar system who maintained contact with this decoy for more than a few minutes would inevitably realize that the echo was not consistent with a real vessel. The decoy's static nature and limited maneuverability betrayed its artificiality. In response, extensive research was undertaken into absorbent hull coatings designed to reduce the sonar reflection from actual submarines, aiming to make them less detectable. These efforts, however, never resulted in a successful deployment. The Germans christened this concept Alberich, after a dwarf from Wagnerian opera, famed for possessing an invisibility cloak, an apt name given the technology's elusive nature. The core idea behind coatings like Alberich was sound in principle. A flexible rubber-based material infused with countless tiny air bubbles could, in theory, absorb incoming sonar pulses rather than reflecting them back to the attacker's sonar system. Laboratory experiments demonstrated promising results. The concept seemed like a plausible method for reducing a submarine's sonar signature. Yet, when applied practically in the harsh environment of the ocean, the technology encountered insurmountable barriers. To be effective, this rubber coating needed to be several centimeters thick, which significantly increased the vessel's weight and compromised its operational performance. Moreover, the coating proved highly susceptible to rapid degradation in seawater, losing its properties within a matter of days or weeks. The most critical flaw was its inability to withstand the immense pressure changes encountered during deep dives. As the submarine descended, the coating would compress under pressure, diminishing its sound-absorbing qualities. Conversely, when the vessel surfaced, the coating would expand irregularly, leading to tears, gaps, and the loss of its integrity altogether. After extensive months of testing on captured U-boats, the Allied forces concluded that Alberich was essentially ineffective. German scientists, working with even fewer resources and less time, arrived at the same grim conclusion. They recognized that the fundamental problem was rooted in the strategic focus of the German naval engineers. Over 2 decades, they had dedicated their efforts predominantly to developing anti-UB marine technologies, such as refining sonar detection and attack systems, with comparatively little emphasis on the countermeasures that could hide a submarine from such detection. Consequently, when Allied detection systems matured and became more sophisticated and widespread, Germany's defenses were woefully inadequate. This strategic misjudgment stemmed from an incorrect assumption that future naval warfare would closely resemble the patterns of the past. The Germans had prepared diligently to face conventional threats, hoping to fight the last war, while the Allies had been developing groundbreaking technologies for a radically different type of conflict, one that prioritized stealth, electronic warfare, and rapid, unpredictable maneuvers. The results of this oversight were catastrophic, with human lives lost at a horrifying and accelerating rate. By September of 1942, approximately 3,000 men were at sea aboard operational U-boat vessels, risking their lives in an environment where survival was increasingly unlikely. As the war progressed, the toll grew even more dire. By August of 1944, nearly 28,000 of the 40,000 men who had served in the German U-boat fleet had been killed. The survival rate for submarine crews plummeted to below 30%, turning every patrol into a near-certain death sentence. Despite these staggering odds, the German Navy persisted in dispatching submarines into hostile waters, even as inexperienced crews replaced seasoned commanders who had initially achieved early successes. A poignant account from Feldwebel Hirschfeld, who transferred to the larger Type 9D submarine U-234 in early 1944, vividly illustrates the psychological toll on the crews. He described how the new recruits we find ourselves navigating the perilous waters in vessels that resemble iron coffins, submarines designed for stealth yet often compromised by the relentless march of technology and nature's own chaos. The introduction of snorkel technology in the middle of 1944 briefly ignited a flicker of hope among the crews and engineers alike. This innovation, a simple yet revolutionary extendable breathing tube, was engineered to allow submarines, or U-boats as they were more commonly known, to operate their diesel engines while remaining submerged. Such a device meant that these vessels could theoretically remain underwater throughout entire patrols, significantly reducing their exposure to enemy detection. The snorkel itself was not a novel invention. It originated as Dutch technology, which the German forces managed to seize when they occupied the Netherlands in the early years of the war, in 1940. Initially, the Dutch design was straightforward, consisting merely of a tube that extended above the waterline, providing an air intake for the submarine's diesel engines while the craft maintained a periscope depth. However, German engineers did not merely adopt this concept, they refined and improved upon it. They incorporated automatic valves that could seal the tube when waves washed over it, preventing water from flooding into the vessel. Additionally, they installed specialized exhaust systems capable of venting diesel fumes underwater, thereby eliminating the telltale smoke plume that had previously made surfaced submarines easy targets for detection at a distance. Despite its technological advancements, operating the snorkel proved to be an arduous ordeal for the crew. Maintaining the precise depth required was a constant battle, with the snorkel head needing to stay just above the surface. If the submarine descended too deep, the automatic valve would close, causing the engines, running at full power, to draw air from within the vessel, creating a dangerous and uncomfortable situation. Conversely, if the submarine floated too high, the conning tower, and consequently the snorkel, would breach the surface, exposing the vessel to detection by aircraft and surface radar systems. The turbulent seas further complicated these delicate adjustments. Waves repeatedly washed over the snorkel head, triggering the automatic valves to open and close in rapid succession, causing significant pressure fluctuations inside the submarine's confines. These fluctuations were not only physically painful but also created a cacophony that made normal communication impossible. Crew members experienced agonizing ear pain due to the abrupt pressure changes, and the noise from the engines roaring at full throttle inside the cramped, submerged environment was deafening. The constant vibration rattled every fitting within the vessel, preventing any chance of restful sleep. Despite the Germans' efforts to contain exhaust fumes, leaks still occurred, permeating the interior with fumes that induced headaches and nausea among the crew. After enduring this grueling process for approximately 12 hours, sometimes longer, the crews would emerge exhausted, sick, and effectively deafened by the relentless auditory assault. More troubling was the fact that snorkel operation did not provide the stealth advantage that German submariners had envisioned. Allied radar operators, ever adapting and improving their detection capabilities, learned to identify the presence of snorkel heads with increasing reliability. Although the radar cross-section of the snorkel was small and initially difficult to detect, aircraft equipped with advanced radar systems, particularly those operating sentiment radar technology, could pick up faint returns from the tube, especially in calm sea conditions. Once detected, Allied aircraft would often attack immediately, deploying depth charges or homing torpedoes. Such attacks would force the submarine to dive deeper, prematurely ending its battery recharging cycle and forcing it to remain submerged for longer periods. At times, surface escorts would also detect snorkeling submarines through the acoustic signature of the running diesel engines or by observing the wake created as the snorkel tube sliced through the water. Over time, Allied operators became experts at differentiating between genuine submarine contacts and false echoes. Extensive training programs produced thousands of skilled sonar operators capable of analyzing the complex acoustic patterns and distinguishing actual threats from background noise. These advancements in detection technology, coupled with persistent air and surface patrols, gradually eroded the tactical advantage that the snorkel was supposed to provide. Ultimately, despite the initial promise and engineering ingenuity behind the snorkel, the realities of its operation, marked by discomfort, danger, and increased vulnerability, severely limited its effectiveness in the broader context of submarine warfare. With the advent of advanced acoustic targeting systems, Soviet submarines evolved in their ability to identify, classify, and engage targets with remarkable precision. Their sonar systems could analyze echo signatures to determine the type of vessel lurking beneath the waves, enabling commanders to assess threat levels and plan their tactics accordingly. These systems were also crucial for tracking evasive maneuvers, allowing submarines to follow their targets even when they attempted to break contact through complex maneuvers or by hiding behind natural thermal layers in the ocean. The integration of cutting-edge equipment and highly trained operators resulted in an intricate detection network that enemy submarines found increasingly difficult to evade. During this period, Western naval forces, particularly those from Britain and the United States, standardized their anti-submarine training programs, emphasizing the mastery of acoustic detection techniques. New recruits underwent weeks of intensive instruction, both in classrooms and hands-on environments, where they learned the intricacies of underwater acoustics. These courses covered topics such as how sound propagates through water, the influence of temperature gradients and salinity on sonar beam paths, and the ways in which submarine hulls reflected sound waves. Operators studied extensive recordings of real submarine echoes, learning to differentiate these from natural underwater sounds like whale calls, shipwreck noises, schools of fish, or thermal stratification layers. They trained on sophisticated simulators that recreated realistic hunting scenarios, sharpening their ability to recognize subtle differences in echoes and respond instantly in combat situations. By the year 1944, Allied navies were commissioning sonar operators whose skills surpassed those of their early war predecessors, who had initially developed tactics through trial and error under high-pressure conditions. These operators took great pride in their expertise, competing fiercely to improve their detection times, extend tracking durations, and increase the success rate of attacks. The Royal Navy, in particular, published monthly performance tables ranking sonar teams based on their operational effectiveness. The most proficient operators received promotions, medals, and recognition, and their legendary status grew as stories circulated about individuals capable of identifying specific submarine models based on nuanced variations in echo patterns. Some of these elite operators could track evasive submarines navigating through temperature layers, maintaining contact despite the challenges posed by complex underwater environments. Once contact was established, they rarely lost it, thanks to their exceptional skills and experience. By the time of the Normandy invasion on June 6, 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively won in favor of the Allies. On the day of the amphibious assault, not a single Allied vessel was lost to German submarines, despite the desperate efforts of U-boat commanders to disrupt the massive cross-channel landings. The sonar screens maintained by Allied escort ships were so effective that any submarine attempting to approach the invasion fleet was immediately detected, forcing it to withdraw or be destroyed before it could launch torpedoes. Although some U-boats managed to sink ships in the days and weeks following the initial landings, the invasion fleet itself crossed the channel largely unmolested by submarine attack. Admiral Donitz had ordered every available U-boat to attack the invasion fleet, deploying a total of around 36 submarines to the English Channel and approaches to the western coasts. The mission was essentially suicidal, and everyone involved knew it. The shallow waters of the Channel limited submarine maneuverability significantly, while Allied air superiority was overwhelming, with hundreds of aircraft constantly patrolling and providing continuous coverage. Surface escorts, numbering in the hundreds, created overlapping sonar coverage that left no gaps for stealthy attacks. Despite these formidable obstacles, the Germans persisted, with some U-boats equipped with snorkels managing to operate slightly more effectively than those without. One such vessel, U-84, commanded by Uloit Hinde, managed to penetrate close enough to the invasion beaches on June 8 to fire torpedoes at landing craft. The submarine survived the encounter and withdrew, though relentless Allied acoustic and aerial countermeasures kept the pressure on German submarines throughout the operation, making the task increasingly perilous and ultimately nearly impossible for the attacking U-boats. The relentless onslaught of depth charges and relentless tracking inflicted severe damage upon the submarines, leaving many of them crippled or destroyed. Among the few that managed to survive such harrowing encounters, U-984 stood out as one of only 3 vessels that successfully engaged invasion shipping and lived to recount the ordeal. For most of its comrades, however, the outcome was far less fortunate, often ending in catastrophic loss. On the 9th of June, the U-55 was detected by the ASDIC system, an early form of sonar, while attempting to approach the invasion fleet. The frigate Hulstead was the one to first establish contact, maintaining a continuous lock on the submersible for nearly 11 hours. During this time, the submarine submerged, running silently in an effort to evade detection, but the Type 147 Aztec was precise enough to track its movements in 3 dimensions, making escape nearly impossible. As the frigate's ammunition of depth charges dwindled, it called in support, and the destroyer Eskimo was brought into the hunt. Eskimo launched a series of attacks using squid mortars, a weapon designed to deliver powerful explosive payloads against submerged targets. The second attack pattern struck U-955 amidships, causing a critical breach in its pressure hull. The damage was so severe that the submarine sank swiftly, taking all 48 crew members with it, an irreversible tragedy for the German Navy. On June 10, the U-821 became the target of an intense, 14-hour pursuit by multiple escort ships. The submarine employed every evasive maneuver at its disposal, including diving to 300 meters depth, deploying decoys to mislead its pursuers, and altering its course in unpredictable ways. Despite these efforts, the Aztec contact remained unwaveringly solid, a testament to the Allies' sonar capabilities. As the situation grew desperate, with batteries nearly depleted and breathable air becoming scarce, the captain, Lieutenant Ulrich Nakfus, was faced with a grim choice. He surfaced the boat to surrender, ending the relentless chase. Allied ships quickly responded, rescuing 37 survivors from the icy depths. Tragically, 12 sailors had already lost their lives during the relentless depth charge attacks, their sacrifices etched into the grim tally of wartime losses. The relentless attrition persisted through the months of June and July. Of the 36 U-boat submarines dispatched to disrupt the invasion, only 11 remained operational by the end, with 25 destroyed, an alarming loss rate of nearly 70% within just 2 months. The surviving vessels limped back to French ports, battered, traumatized, and burdened with the heavy weight of mission failures. Despite their losses, none of the German submarines managed to sink a troop transport or a major warship. Instead, the damage was inflicted primarily on smaller vessels and landing craft, which often bore the brunt of the attack, at a terrible cost. Hundreds of submariners lost their lives, and dozens of submarines were rendered irreparable. The seafloor off Normandy soon became a graveyard littered with wrecks, grim monuments to the futility of submarine warfare against an opponent wielding total sonar and radar dominance. Post-war surveys of the invasion area revealed the stark reality. 17 German U-boat hulls lay at the bottom of the ocean, most bearing unmistakable signs of catastrophic depth charge damage. These wrecks served as underwater memorials, silent testaments to the hopelessness of deploying submarines against an enemy with absolute undersea detection and tracking capabilities. In a final act of desperation, the Germans introduced the Type 21 Electro boat during the last months of the war, an advanced submarine design that sought to restore their underwater advantage. These revolutionary vessels boasted streamlined hulls and enormous battery capacities, allowing sustained submerged speeds of around 17 knots, faster than most surface ships of the time, and featured sophisticated acoustic dampening systems to minimize their sonar signature. Had these submarines been available in larger numbers back in 1943, they could have potentially altered the course of the battle, offering the Germans a fighting chance to contest Allied dominance beneath the waves. Regrettably, only 2 of these Type 21 boats completed combat patrols before Germany surrendered unconditionally, rendering their potential contributions moot. The design itself marked a radical departure from earlier submarine concepts, which were primarily surface ships capable of brief underwater forays. The Type 21 was conceived as an underwater-centric vessel, intended to operate predominantly beneath the surface, surfacing only when truly necessary. Its hull was streamlined to resemble a torpedo, eliminating external features such as deck guns, torpedo storage tubes, and other protrusions that created drag and compromised stealth. This hydrodynamic innovation, combined with a tripling of battery capacity compared to traditional submarines, enabled the Type 21 to achieve sustained underwater speeds that outstripped most contemporary surface vessels. Its design aimed to make the submarine faster, quieter, and more elusive, thereby challenging the Allied undersea supremacy that had been firmly established during the war. Despite their revolutionary design, the limited number of combat-ready units a remarkable innovation in submarine design that promised to redefine underwater warfare. The specifications of this vessel were truly impressive for its time. It was capable of maintaining a submerged speed of approximately 17 knots, sustaining this rapid pace for up to 90 minutes without needing to surface. Moreover, it could cruise at a more modest speed of around 6 knots continuously for an impressive duration of 3 days, all while remaining completely submerged. This extended underwater endurance was achieved through advanced engineering and efficient energy management, enabling the submarine to operate for prolonged periods beneath the surface. The vessel's diving capabilities were equally notable, as it could reach depths of approximately 280 meters, far surpassing the typical depths at which Allied depth charges were set, thereby offering a significant tactical advantage. One of the most groundbreaking features of the Type 21 was its revolutionary hydraulic torpedo reload system. Unlike previous models, this system allowed the submarine to fire all 6 torpedoes from its bow, swiftly reload, and be ready to fire again in less than 20 minutes, all while remaining at action stations and prepared for immediate combat. This rapid-fire capability greatly enhanced the vessel's offensive potential, enabling it to engage multiple targets in quick succession without the need to surface or make lengthy reloads. German engineers also made considerable progress in addressing the critical issue of sonar detection, a persistent challenge in underwater warfare. To this end, the hull of the Type 21 was coated with synthetic rubber tiles, specifically designed to absorb and dampen the pulses of the Allied sonar system known as ASDICH. The submarine's propellers were meticulously designed to minimize cavitation noise, a major source of acoustic signature, making the vessel harder to detect acoustically. Furthermore, the machinery and engines were mounted on rubber isolators, significantly reducing the transmission of vibrations through the hull and further decreasing the chances of sonar detection. The snorkel, an essential device for running diesel engines while submerged, was also improved through the use of better valves and more efficient airflow systems, making it less conspicuous to enemy sensors. In theory, these advancements should have rendered the Type 21 much more difficult for Allied forces to detect and track compared to traditional submarines. Production of these vessels commenced in late 1943, utilizing innovative prefabrication techniques that closely resembled American shipbuilding methods of the time. The process involved building the submarine from 8 large sections, each constructed in different factories across Germany. These sections were then transported to assembly yards where the final construction took place. This modular approach significantly accelerated production, allowing for rapid manufacturing of multiple units. By the end of the war, a total of 118 Type 21 submarines had been completed, although only 4 of these reached operational status and were ready for combat. However, the development and production of the Type 21 were plagued by numerous problems, primarily because of the hurried timelines and scattered manufacturing efforts. The quality control measures suffered greatly, resulting in numerous defects. Sections produced in different factories often failed to align properly during assembly, causing structural issues. Welds sometimes cracked under pressure, electrical systems failed unexpectedly, and the hydraulic torpedo reloading system was prone to leaks. Perhaps most critically, the rubber coating intended to reduce sonar detection proved unreliable in practice. It degraded rapidly when exposed to seawater, peeled off during deep dives, and in some conditions, actually increased the submarine's acoustic signature rather than decreasing it. The only vessel to conduct a genuine combat patrol was the U-2511, commanded by Corvette Captain Adalbert Schnee. This submarine departed from Bergen, Norway, on the 30th of April, 1945, just days before Germany's surrender in the war. Schnee's orders were to demonstrate the groundbreaking capabilities of the new submarine by penetrating Allied patrol lines and reaching the North Atlantic. Over the course of 2 weeks, U-2511 operated off the British Isles, evading numerous Allied anti-submarine forces along the way. During this patrol, Schnee detected several potential targets but refrained from engaging, following strict orders to avoid unnecessary confrontation unless conditions were clearly advantageous. This patrol ultimately showcased both the strengths and limitations of the Type 21. It was evident that the submarine could indeed outrun escort vessels once detected, thanks to its remarkable underwater speed and agility. Its endurance while submerged was extraordinary, allowing for extended operations deep beneath the surface. Nonetheless, the vessel remained vulnerable to detection by Allied sonar systems, which quickly adapted to its acoustic signature. On several occasions, escort ships managed to establish solid contact and launched attacks, but the U-2511's superior speed underwater enabled it to escape each time. In the final report filed after Germany's surrender, Captain Schnee summarized that, although the Type 21 represented a significant technological leap over traditional submarines, it still faced considerable limitations and issues that hindered its full tactical potential. Despite its advanced features and promising design, the vessel's unreliable coatings, mechanical problems, and the evolving nature of Allied detection methods meant that its true impact on the course of submarine warfare remained limited. Nevertheless, the Type 21 laid important groundwork for future underwater. The vessel was no longer invisible to Allied sonar systems. With enough time and persistent effort, the Allied forces would have inevitably devised new tactics and technological innovations to detect, track, and eventually neutralize it. The U-30008, the only other Type 21 submarine to undertake a combat patrol, had an even more unimpressive and disappointing record, further illustrating the challenges faced by these advanced vessels. This particular submarine had set out from Kiel on the 1st of May in the year 1945, with a specific mission to evacuate German personnel from Norway. However, by the 9th of May, just 8 days later, it had surrendered peacefully to Allied forces, having not fired a single shot in combat. The surrender marked the end of its brief operational life. After the war, extensive examinations conducted by British and American naval experts shed light on the numerous quality control issues that plagued the German submarines of this class. The rubber coatings that were supposed to ensure stealth and durability were peeling away in multiple areas, exposing the underlying structures. Hydraulic systems were leaking, compromising the submarine's operational integrity. Electrical connections had corroded over time, further impairing functionality. Despite these problems, the submarine was still considered operationally capable, but it was a far cry from the revolutionary weapon that German propaganda had claimed it to be. For the crews of the German submarines who survived the tumult of the war, the most haunting memory remained the relentless sound of sonar pings striking their hulls. That sharp, metallic ringing grew deafeningly louder as escorts closed in, transforming the once feared invincible U-boat into a vulnerable target. Those sounds signaled a stark reality: the end of the era of submarine invincibility. It was a harbinger of systematic destruction, marking a turning point where the once dreaded submarines could no longer evade detection or destruction with ease. Herbert Wehrer, one of the few surviving commanders of the Type 21 submarines still in operation when the war ended, emigrated to the United States in 1957 and eventually became an American citizen. In 1969, he published a memoir titled Iron Coffins, which detailed his experiences in submarine warfare. The dedication of his book was a poignant tribute to my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea. In his memoir, Wehrer candidly acknowledged a harsh truth that he had struggled to accept for many years. The German submariners had been defeated not merely by superior bravery or numerical superiority, although those factors had played a role, but primarily by technology that they neither fully understood nor could effectively counter. The Allies had developed the ability to see through water, an invisible frontier that the Germans had hoped to conceal their vessels within. The Germans, on the other hand, had never succeeded in creating effective means of concealment, making their submarines perpetually vulnerable to detection and attack. Wehrer's personal journey from a defeated enemy to an American citizen reflected a profound transformation that paralleled his wartime experiences. After Germany's surrender, he spent approximately 2 years in British prisoner of war camps, where he worked as an interpreter and a liaison between Allied authorities and German naval personnel. His fluency in English and his cooperative attitude earned him an early release in 1947. He briefly returned to Germany, only to find a nation devastated physically and psychologically by the war's destruction. The submarine service he had once known was no longer there. The naval bases were in ruins, and the bunkers were filled with scuttled ships, remnants of the German effort to deny their strategic assets to the enemy. Most of his comrades had perished, their lives cut short amid the brutal chaos of war. In 1952, Wehrer made the pivotal decision to immigrate once more, this time to the United States, arriving on a technical visa sponsored by a marine engineering firm that valued his expertise in submarines and sonar technology. He settled in Connecticut, working as a consultant on sonar systems and underwater acoustics, ironically assisting in the development of the very technology that had ultimately defeated the German submarines. The paradox was not lost on him. He was helping to improve the tools that had hunted him through the Atlantic depths. By 1957, Herbert Wehrer became an American citizen, taking an oath of allegiance to the nation whose sonar systems had relentlessly pursued him. Writing Iron Coffins became his way of processing the trauma of war, of confronting the loss of comrades, and of honoring those who had fallen beneath the waves. He spent the remaining years of his life reflecting on the complex relationship between technology, warfare, and human resilience, a journey marked by both loss and the hope for understanding. Throughout the course of meticulous research, countless hours were dedicated to interviewing survivors, analyzing war diaries, and scrutinizing patrol reports. These efforts culminated in the publication of a profoundly impactful book when Wehrer was just 49 years old. The work rapidly gained acclaim, becoming an instant bestseller that captivated a broad readership. American audiences, in particular, were deeply intrigued by the visceral, first-hand account of submarine warfare from the perspective of the enemy, an unfiltered glimpse into the clandestine and deadly world beneath the waves. Meanwhile, German readers, especially veterans who had experienced the intensities of battle firsthand, welcomed the memoir as an honest and unvarnished testimony to their own wartime hardships. Unlike many German wartime narratives that tended to romanticize or justify the motives and actions of Nazi service, Wehr's memoir openly acknowledged the futile and horrific realities faced during the final years of the U-boat wars, offering a stark and sobering perspective. Despite its widespread acclaim, the book's reception was not entirely without controversy. Some German veterans accused Wehrer of exaggerating the technological superiority of Allied sonar systems as a means to justify Germany's military defeat. Similarly, a handful of American critics alleged that Wehrer might have inflated his personal accomplishments while minimizing the extent of German war crimes. These criticisms sparked debates among historians and veterans alike. Naval experts examined the details and disputed some of the statistical data presented, yet the core narrative, highlighting German submariners' encounters with increasingly effective Allied sonar technology they could not effectively counter, was generally accepted as fundamentally accurate. After the publication, Wehrer continued to serve as a marine consultant, a role he maintained until his retirement in 1985. In his later years, Wehrer occasionally shared his experiences through lectures at prestigious institutions such as the Naval War College and the Submarine School, where he engaged with American naval officers eager to learn from his first-hand knowledge. He also participated in various historical conferences and contributed to documentaries focused on the Battle of the Atlantic. As time passed, Wehrer became an outspoken advocate for reconciliation between Germany and the United States, speaking at veteran organizations, schools, and community events about the tragic futility of war and emphasizing the importance of international cooperation and understanding. His efforts reflected a sincere desire to foster peace and mutual respect between former enemies. The stark reality of the wartime statistics paints a grim picture. Out of approximately 1,160 U-boat submarines commissioned during World War II, an alarming total of 785 were lost. The war claimed the lives of around 30,000 submariners, resulting in a casualty rate of roughly 75%, the highest mortality rate of any military branch during that conflict. The majority of these devastating losses occurred after May of 1943, once Allied sonar systems had reached a level of maturity that rendered German submarines increasingly vulnerable. In the final 18 months of the war, deploying a U-boat on patrol effectively meant sentencing the crew to death, as the odds of survival dwindled dramatically. One of the most remarkable survivors from this perilous era was Wolfgang Hirschfeld, a radio operator who had served aboard U-109 during its early campaigns and survived the entire war, eventually surrendering aboard U-234 in May of 1945. In his diary's closing entry, he reflected on the brutal reality faced by submariners. "We who sailed beneath the waves believed ourselves invisible warriors. The enemy demonstrated that invisibility was nothing but an illusion. Their sonar stripped away our sanctuary, exposing us to the relentless gaze beneath the surface. In the end, we were simply men trapped in steel tubes, waiting for the inevitable ping that would find us." And it always did. Hirschfeld's survival was extraordinary, given the perilous conditions and the overwhelming odds against him. U-234 departed from Kiel in April of 1945 on what was to be its final patrol, carrying a clandestine cargo destined for Japan. The vessel was loaded with advanced weaponry, including blueprints and technical documents crucial for military innovation, samples of uranium oxide essential for nuclear development, and 2 Japanese naval officers. The mission was covert, to exchange German technological secrets for Japanese raw materials, particularly rubber and rare metals vital for war efforts. However, Germany surrendered before the submarine could reach its destination in Japan. Commanding Officer Captain Lieutenant Jan Heinrich Fehler faced an impossible decision: either surrender to the advancing American forces, continue the perilous journey to Japan, or scuttle the vessel to prevent its technology from falling into Allied hands. Fehler ultimately chose to surrender, but the circumstances surrounding this decision remain a subject of historical interest and debate. Before the destruction of the uranium samples and the classified documents, a notable event unfolded on May 19, 1945, which would later be remembered as a peculiar and significant moment in naval history. On that day, the submarine designated U-234, which had been operating covertly during the final months of World War II, unexpectedly surfaced off the coast of New Hampshire. Instead of continuing its secretive mission, the vessel transmitted a surrender message to the United States Navy, signaling its intent to cease hostilities and surrender to Allied forces. This unexpected communication marked a dramatic turn in the submarine's saga and prompted immediate naval response. Following this surrender, the destroyer USS Sutton was assigned to escort the U-234 to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. The crew aboard the submarine, including a prominent officer named Hirschfeld, were taken as prisoners of war. Nevertheless, the treatment they received from American authorities was notably courteous and respectful, a stark contrast to the harsh conditions often associated with wartime captivity. The Americans were particularly fascinated by the technological marvel that was the large Type 10D cargo submarine, as well as by the vessel's unusual cargo, which included the remnants of uranium samples and sensitive documents classified at the time. Hirschfeld and his crew were held as prisoners for a period of approximately 8 months in a camp located in Maryland. These months provided a unique insight into the American approach to prisoner treatment, which prioritized adequate food, medical care, and humane conditions, an approach that stood in stark contrast to the brutal environment experienced by many German prisoners in Soviet captivity, where numerous prisoners of war did not survive the harsh treatment and inadequate conditions. During his time in captivity, Hirschfeld was assigned to work as an electrician. He repaired radios and also took on the role of teacher, instructing American intelligence officers in the German language as part of their preparations for occupation duties. His interactions with the Americans offered him a rare perspective on the war's end and the complexities of international captivity. In January of 1946, Hirschfeld was repatriated to Germany, returning to his home country after almost a year of detention. Upon returning to Hamburg, Hirschfeld was confronted with the stark reality of a war-ravaged city. His family's home had been destroyed in a bombing raid carried out by the Allied forces, leaving him devastated. His father had lost his life in the same raid, while his mother and sister had survived but were forced to live in a refugee camp due to the widespread destruction and displacement across Germany. The country itself was a shattered landscape, divided, occupied, and struggling to recover from the devastation wrought by years of relentless conflict. Despite these hardships, Hirschfeld found work in various sectors, doing electrical work, repairing ships, and serving as a translator for the British occupation forces. Throughout the 1950s, he embarked on a personal project that would eventually bring him recognition, writing a memoir based on the secret diary he kept during the war. This diary served as a raw, unfiltered account of his experiences, capturing the emotional and psychological toll of the conflict. The memoir was published in Germany in 1972, providing a candid and unsentimental perspective on life aboard a German U-boat. Unlike accounts from commanding officers that often emphasized heroism and strategic prowess, Hirschfeld's narrative offered a crew member's view, focused on the daily struggles, fears, camaraderie, and despair experienced during the arduous Battle of the Atlantic. His diary entries from the years 1942 and 1943 traced a harrowing journey from initial confidence to creeping terror. Early entries celebrated successful attacks against Allied convoys, narrow escapes from detection, and strong bonds formed among crew members. However, as the war progressed, the entries darkened, recording mounting losses, failed attacks, and the gradual unraveling of morale among the crew. As Allied sonar technology improved, the crew faced the terrifying realization that they were increasingly vulnerable, hunted relentlessly by an adversary with tools they could not outrun or outmaneuver. The final entries from 1945 conveyed a sense of resignation rather than defiance, revealing a crew that had come to accept their doomed fate. Hirschfeld reflected on this period with a poignant acknowledgement. We knew the war was lost. We knew most of us would die. But we kept going because that was what warriors did, even when the cause was hopeless and unjust. His words underscored the grim reality faced by many soldiers, fighting on despite knowing the odds were insurmountable, driven by duty, honor, or perhaps a sense of inherited resolve. The story of Hirschfeld and his crew also delivered a stark lesson in technological evolution. The advent of active sonar had fundamentally transformed submarine warfare, rendering the oceans transparent in ways they had not been in earlier years. It was now possible for naval forces to detect submerged vessels with startling precision, effectively ending the era of submerged concealment that had once been possible in the early stages of the war. Every navy around the world studied the battle in the aftermath of the Second World War. A significant focus was placed on isolating submarine systems through the use of soundproofing mounts. The primary objective remained unchanged: to regain the elusive stealth that the German U-boat fleet had lost as Allied sonar technology advanced and matured. This ongoing battle for invisibility became a central theme in submarine design, as each side sought to outmaneuver the other in the silent contest beneath the waves. During the post-war years, the Soviet Union captured several Type 21 submarines along with dozens of German engineers who had worked on their development. These captured vessels and personnel formed a crucial foundation for the Soviet Navy's efforts to create a new generation of submarines. The resulting Whiskey-class submarines, which quickly became the backbone of the Soviet underwater fleet during the 1950s, owed much of their design to the innovations pioneered by the Germans. Soviet naval architects meticulously studied every aspect of the Type 21 design, with particular attention paid to its advanced sound dampening features. Recognizing that future submarine warfare would largely hinge on the ongoing competition between stealth and detection, they integrated several German-derived technologies into their own submarines. These included the application of rubber anechoic tiles to absorb sound waves, enhancements to propeller design to reduce cavitation noise, and machinery mounting systems crafted to isolate vibrations, all aimed at minimizing acoustic signatures. Meanwhile, the United States Navy conducted comprehensive testing of their captured U-boat technology, focusing especially on the two submarines designated U-2513 and U-3008, both of which were Type 21 vessels surrendered in May of 1945. American engineers were notably impressed by several features of these submarines. The streamlined hull shape was highly efficient, reducing hydrodynamic resistance and enabling greater underwater speeds. The large capacity of their batteries allowed for extended submerged operations, while hydraulic systems contributed to maneuverability and control. These design elements significantly influenced the development of subsequent American submarines, most notably the Tang class, which marked the country's first purpose-built post-war submarine fleet. The Tang class incorporated the distinctive teardrop hull form pioneered by German designers, nearly doubling the underwater speed compared to the submarines used during the war. Across the Atlantic, Britain's Royal Navy subjected the U-2511 to rigorous testing, including tactical exercises against escort groups equipped with the latest in sonar technology, such as the ASDICH system. The results of these evaluations were sobering and revealed the formidable challenge faced by anti-submarine forces. Despite improvements in sonar detection capabilities, tracking and maintaining contact with a fast, quiet, and deeply diving submarine proved to be exceedingly difficult. These exercises underscored a critical point. If German Type 21 boats had been deployed in large numbers as early as 1943, they could have posed an even more severe threat to Allied anti-submarine efforts than previously anticipated. This realization spurred a decade of intense innovation in British submarine development. The British designed and built the Porpoise-class submarines, which incorporated many design features inspired by the Type 21, aiming to address the emerging threat with cutting-edge technology. Concurrently, sonar systems experienced exponential improvements. Passive arrays, capable of detecting submarines from hundreds of miles away, became standard. Active sonar systems advanced into multi-frequency configurations, capable of countering most enemy countermeasures. The advent of sophisticated computer processing enabled automatic classification of targets, making detection and identification faster and more accurate. As a result, the technological contest between submarine stealth, its ability to remain undetected, and detection capabilities, its ability to find and track submarines, became one of the defining features of Cold War naval warfare. The legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic persisted, driving American sonar development in the 1950s to revolutionary heights. In 1952, the SQS-4 sonar system was introduced, capable of tracking targets at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. Variable depth sonar, towed behind surface ships on long cables, could be lowered beneath thermal layers in the water column, enabling detection of deep-diving submarines that previously evaded surface-based sensors. Additionally, networks of sonobuoys deployed from aircraft created acoustic fences across vital strategic choke points, further enhancing detection coverage. By the 60s, American anti-submarine forces had developed capabilities that vastly outstripped those of the Second World War, achieving detection ranges and accuracies once thought impossible, with technological leaps that redefined underwater warfare. In this evolving environment, Soviet submariners, much like their German predecessors during 1943, found themselves in a perilous position. They were increasingly being hunted by a highly sophisticated and technologically advanced anti-submarine fleet. The silent contest between them and their foes intensified, as each side pushed the boundaries of what was possible in stealth and detection beneath the ocean's surface. During the Cold War era, an era marked by intense technological competition and strategic rivalry, sonar technology played a pivotal role in transforming underwater warfare. This technological innovation effectively dismantled the once untouchable sanctuaries of submarines operating beneath the ocean's surface. Decades later, when Soviet naval archives were declassified and made available after the conclusion of the Cold War, they unveiled startling insights. Submarine commanders from the 1960s and 70s candidly described how the psychological toll inflicted by Western sonar systems was strikingly similar to the experiences recounted by German submarine veterans during World War II. The relentless barrage of sonar pings, the persistent awareness that the enemy was aware of their precise location, and the helplessness that came from being tracked by invisible, sound-based technology, All these factors combined to create an environment of constant psychological strain. This relentless pursuit and counter-pursuit fueled an intense technological arms race, pushing both superpowers to their limits. As a result, Soviet submarines underwent significant advancements, becoming progressively quieter through the implementation of cutting-edge propeller designs, innovative rubber coatings to dampen noise, and state-of-the-art propulsion systems that minimized acoustic signatures. Meanwhile, American submarines adopted comparable technological innovations, striving to enhance their passive sonar arrays, making them even more sensitive and capable of detecting faint signals. This race toward silent underwater dominance reached its zenith with the advent of nuclear-powered submarines. Their ability to operate submerged continuously for months, unmatched by earlier diesel-electric designs, represented a genuine leap forward, granting them extended underwater endurance and strategic flexibility. Yet, even these formidable vessels remained vulnerable to acoustic detection, underscoring the persistent challenge that sonar posed in the underwater battlefield. The fundamental lesson derived from the historic Battle of the Atlantic, that sonar could shatter the illusion of submarine invisibility, remained as relevant as ever. This enduring truth was reinforced by the constant human element within submarine crews across all navies. These sailors, regardless of nationality, internalized the brutal lessons learned by German submariners during the war's darkest hours. Being detected by sonar was more than merely an operational setback, it was a signal of vulnerability, a potential death sentence. The distinct, high-pitched ping of active sonar striking a vessel's hull was a universal sound that evoked primal fear among submarine crews, whether American, British, Soviet, or French. This sound indicated that the enemy was aware of their position, could track their movements, and potentially launch weapons. Such moments of detection carried profound psychological consequences: fear, anxiety, and the realization of exposure. The experience of submarine warfare, shaped profoundly by the harrowing events from 1943 to 1945, persisted unchanged into the Cold War period, underscoring the constant tension and peril of underwater combat. In the year of 1985, exactly 4 decades after the conclusion of the Second World War, a small and informal gathering convened in the United States. This assembly consisted of German submarine veterans, former U-boat sailors, some accompanied by their families. They came to meet and reflect on their shared history and to confront the technology that had ultimately defeated them. Among these veterans was Herbert Vierer, then 75 years old, who had long since settled in America. During the gathering, he engaged in candid conversation with his peers, sharing their collective memories of wartime experiences. Vierer recounted that during the war, they had believed in their invincibility beneath the waves, an illusion founded on the assumption that the ocean's depths provided absolute protection. Submerging was thought to mean disappearing entirely from the reach of enemy detection and attack. For a brief period, this belief seemed justified, allowing them to operate with a sense of security. However, everything changed the moment they encountered sonar systems employed by their adversaries. That metallic ping, sharp, insistent, and unmistakable when striking their hulls, taught them a harsh lesson: the ocean no longer concealed them. They learned about fear in a way that surface sailors never had to understand. In the darkness of the underwater environment, they could not see their enemies. They could not retaliate or defend themselves. They could only wait and hope as the enemy's technological prowess hunted them relentlessly. Their defeat was not just a matter of military strategy but a consequence of scientific and engineering progress. They acknowledged that their adversaries' capacity to innovate, driven by the ideals of free societies, had outpaced their ability to adapt. Most of those who survived their wartime encounters attributed their survival largely to luck. They understood, and wished to honor the reality, that they were not invincible supermen in unstoppable machines. Instead, they were young men operating obsolete submarines, fighting against a technological tide they could not halt. Their stories, shared in quiet reflection, conveyed a collective acknowledgement of vulnerability and the harsh truths of modern underwater warfare. As the small group listened in silence, a mutual recognition passed among them. Despite the passage of decades, the core realities of submarine combat, fear, vulnerability, and in the course of the conflict, former adversaries found themselves united in a shared acknowledgement of a profound transformation that once seemed beyond the realm of possibility, one that had become painfully clear when those initial sonar pings had pierced the silence of the Atlantic, striking German submarines with relentless precision during the early years of the war. They recognized the lesson etched into the depths of the ocean floor, where approximately 30,000 submarine wrecks bore silent testimony to the cost of technological overconfidence and strategic complacency. It became evident that a combination of superior technology, vast industrial resources, and relentless scientific innovation had ultimately proven more decisive than the raw courage, skill, or unwavering determination of individual sailors. The story of the German U-boat experience with Allied sonar stands as one of history's most striking examples of how swiftly military technology can alter the strategic landscape. At the outbreak of the war in 1939, German submarines enjoyed a form of virtual invisibility beneath the waves, lurking beneath the surface and remaining undetectable unless circumstances led to luck or clear mistakes by their pursuers. By the year 1944, however, advancements in sonar technology had revolutionized underwater warfare. Ships equipped with sophisticated systems could now track submarines relentlessly, mapping their movements in three-dimensional space, and guiding weapons with lethal accuracy. The once untouchable underwater sanctuary had been eradicated through the diligent application of scientific principles and engineering excellence. For the sailors who served aboard the U-boats, this technological upheaval meant much more than tactical setbacks. It signified a profound psychological shift. They had entered the war confident in their ability to hunt and destroy unseen enemies, secure in the belief that the ocean itself concealed their presence from the enemy's eyes. Yet by the war's end, they found themselves as the hunted, constantly detected, persistently pursued, aware that the vast, seemingly impenetrable ocean no longer offered them refuge. The sharp, metallic ping of sonar pulses striking their hulls became the stark soundscape of their obsolescence, a haunting reminder of how technology had reshaped the rules of engagement. The strategic consequences of this technological revolution were equally significant. By March of 1943, Britain's vital imports of food, raw materials, and war supplies had dwindled to dangerously low levels, threatening the very survival of the nation. Yet, as the effectiveness of German U-boats waned due to improved Allied sonar and anti-submarine tactics, these supply lines gradually recovered. This resurgence enabled the massive buildup of Allied forces in Britain, paving the way for the D-Day invasion, with little interference from the German submarine fleet. Winston Churchill himself later described the Atlantic supply route as the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire conflict. The German attempt to choke Britain into submission through an unrelenting submarine blockade had ultimately failed, not solely because of the deployment of depth charges and aircraft, but primarily due to the rapid evolution and deployment of sonar technology. In the final analysis, The narrative of German U-boat crews confronting Allied sonar technology is a story marked by surprise, adaptation, failure, and ultimately, defeat. These submariners had entered the war with justified confidence in their invisibility, convinced that their silent, submerged stealth was an unbeatable advantage. Yet, they concluded the war as some of the most casualty-prone servicemen of any nation, their ranks decimated at a rate that reflected the brutal reality of technological disadvantage. Between these two moments of confidence and collapse lay approximately 30,000 individual tragedies, men who drowned in their iron coffins beneath the Atlantic's cold depths, victims of a technology they could neither see nor counter. The sound that forever altered the nature of submarine warfare, the metallic ping of sonar pulses reverberating against steel hulls, carried a simple but powerful message. The ocean no longer concealed you. Surface technology had reached deep beneath the waves, and no sanctuary was invulnerable to detection. For the crews of German submarines, this message arrived too late to save their lives, yet it arrived early enough to influence and reshape submarine doctrine for generations to come. Their harrowing experience, which resulted in casualties numbering around 75%, taught navies worldwide that underwater combat had fundamentally changed. Invisibility was no longer guaranteed. Instead, the ability to detect and track underwater craft had become the new measure of dominance in naval warfare. In the realm of warfare, the realm of the unseen and the unheard, the constant presence of the unknown always lurked just beyond the horizon of possibility. It was within this ever-present shadow of uncertainty that the downfall of submarine dominance was quietly foreshadowed, a realization that had been known all too well by German U-boat commanders back in the year of 1940. They were acutely aware that the seemingly invincible underwater predators could, at any moment, fall prey to an unseen adversary, a force that could reveal their hidden positions and send them to the cold, silent depths of the ocean floor. The haunting legacy of those early sonar pings, those sharp and unrelenting signals bouncing through the water, still reverberates in the modern underwater domain. Every submarine currently patrolling beneath the vast stretches of the world's oceans bears the imprint of this history. It is embedded in the sophisticated detection systems that tirelessly scan the depths for signs of lurking foes, and it influences the doctrines and strategies that guide naval operations, whether the goal is to remain unseen or to seek out the enemy with relentless precision. The crews of the pioneering German U-boats who first heard the chilling metallic ringing striking their hulls, those ominous sounds that betrayed their silent movement, paid the ultimate price in their effort to teach future generations that technological progress can fundamentally alter the rules of engagement. Their sacrifice conveyed a lesson that surpasses any single defeat, that in the relentless evolution of warfare, technological superiority often determines victory or defeat. The march of technological innovation proceeds at a pace that often outstrips the ability of military training, strategic doctrine, or even the courage of individual soldiers and sailors to adapt. Those who fail to recognize and respond to these seismic shifts in warfare history have not merely lost battles. They risk losing entire campaigns, entire wars, and sometimes even their lives. The cold, unyielding iron coffins resting beneath the Atlantic Ocean are silent witnesses to that truth, holding within them the stories of 30,000 men who discovered too late that their once secure sanctuary amid the vast ocean was no longer beyond reach, because science, with all its relentless advance, had stripped it away. Their stories serve as a somber testament to a fundamental reality of modern warfare. Technological superiority often surpasses traditional virtues such as bravery, discipline, and tactical skill. In the relentless contest beneath the waves, it is the mastery of technology that can determine the fate of entire fleets and nations. The Allied sonar systems, which proved capable of detecting German U-boats, did not rely on the ferocity of a torpedo or the cunning of a captain alone. Instead, they harnessed the power of innovation to turn the tide of battle. This technological edge was more decisive than the courage of individual sailors or even the tactical brilliance of commanders. It was the critical weapon that ultimately ended the threat posed by the German U-boats, ensuring Allied dominance in the Atlantic and securing the outcome of that crucial theater of World War II. For the sailors and submariners who experienced the relentless, echoing pinging in the dark depths of the ocean, that sound became a stark marker of their transformation. From confident hunters stalking their prey to the hunted, exposed and vulnerable beneath the crushing weight of technological superiority. They transitioned from stealthy, seemingly invincible predators to vulnerable targets of a force they could neither see nor outrun. That omnipresent, unyielding sound of detection was a haunting reminder that in modern warfare, the line between invisibility and exposure is razor-thin, and that technological advancements can turn the tide in an instant, forever altering the nature of combat beneath the waves.